Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to have Jason Somrak. Jason, first of all, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
Jason, I have your role as Chief of Product and Strategy for Financial Crime and Compliance at Oracle.
Very well. That's a mouthful.
Uh, could you tell us how you got to this role, i.e., your professional background?
Yeah, so I've been at Oracle now about 10 years in a number of roles, most recently in the product side for a number of years. So look after all of our products in the financial crime space. Prior to that, I worked at several large banks in the U.S. doing a variety of roles, starting in investigations, going all the way through to managing deployments for compliance and managing teams across a number of different spectrums.
So I really wanted to maybe take a deep dive with you. I don't get the chance to talk to the chief product officers very often. Usually it's more compliance professionals who are using your products. So I was really interested in your views, starting with really how is AI shaping the fight against financial crimes in 2025?
Yeah, I think it's evolved quite dramatically, right? Especially over the last couple of years. If we look back a little bit, early efforts were focused on how do we predict which alerts are going to be false positives, helping to prioritize work. Then we looked at segmentation and how do we use unsupervised learning to maybe tailor our thresholds more intelligently. Today, more recently on the detection side of things, we're looking at behavioral models and how do we actually replace rules with these, more surgical models that help reduce false positives and uncover more risks. And now with generative AI over the last couple of years, we're seeing a leap really beyond detection, right, into the investigation process and helping to bring greater consistency, better decision making, and a lot faster as well. So I think AI is helping us move the solutions closer to the root cause as opposed to maybe the symptoms that we've been treating for a while.
You mentioned the detective mode. Could we even suggest that you're moving to a preventative or proactive mode as well?
Yeah, I absolutely think that's where this is all headed when you look at, potential automation of investigation and other aspects is, almost a little bit of that minority report effect, right? If you can automate the investigation process, can you detect risks faster than you have today? And I don't know what your view is. Real-time AML always seems to sort of be a key word that comes up, and I always tend to sort of think of it in some ways as just in time AML. So, can we detect things faster? Can we file a SAR faster? Can we, tip off, our stakeholders in law enforcement and national security faster? So I think anything that helps get us to that goal would be beneficial.
Well, I see this faster part, perhaps in a little bit different direction, as opposed to certainly the legal obligations to file SARs or communicate with law enforcement, but giving the compliance professional a set of information that they could start delivering communications around. Or if someone is moving towards an area that might be considered even high risk before they've stepped over that line, you could start to either take a look at what are the reasons or deliver a communication or ask for additional monitoring or scrutiny in-house. So I see the proactive part as something that could really be a game changer. Would that be a fair assessment in your eyes?
Yeah, it's something it's something we've definitely looked at for quite a long time, and I don't think the industry has been there yet. But there's certain models and certain AI capabilities where you look at it almost think of it like a credit score, but for financial crime, right? So you can look at those emergent factors. You can start to identify when someone might be getting, a little bit more risky than they have, and when they start looking like in, suspicious profile. And to your point, you look at them differently. You maybe look at them a little more proactively. So I think we're definitely getting there, and certainly the technology and approaches exist to do that today.
Could you maybe flip over now to, you mentioned not simply filing a SAR or suspicious activity report, but you said moving into triage and perhaps even investigations. Where is AI helping Oracle in those arenas?
Yeah, so I think that's to me one of the most exciting areas, right? Is from Oracle perspective, right? We have what we call AI investigator, right? So it's a multi-agent system, and what we look to do there is really before an investigator ever looks at the case, is do as much of the processing as possible. So we don't want to automate away the judgment. We want to automate the noise away to allow them to use their judgment on it. So Things like following an investigation plan, AI will do that for them. It will research, reach out to the data sources that an investigator would look at, and also help make sense of what that means, right? Is that risky data? Is it not risky data? Not just bring it into the case. Ultimately, author a narrative, make a recommendation, build a complete evidence file so that when a user does log in the morning, they're effectively looking at a completed case and using their judgment as to whether, okay, did this make the right decision? Were the right factors evaluated? So on and so forth. So that's one of the sort of biggest areas we're seeing right now.
I didn't tell you this before we began the podcast, but if you give me the name of the podcast episode in your remarks, you get an extra special gold star. So, automate the noise away. What a great line. I've never heard that. So you've just given us a podcast title. And let me pick up on that a little bit because, we often talk about, it's going to synthesize a large amount of data, identify things that are anomaly above A, beyond Z, and then that's when the human in the loop will come in. But it's before we even get to that point, it's the noise. And as a chief compliance officer with a legal professional background, I had trouble even seeing through the noise. Can you talk about the noise a little bit more from the AML or financial services perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on what role you sit within the compliance organization, the noise is probably different to you. From an outcomes perspective, I look at the noise of being, are you detecting things that are just clogging up your workflow, right? So things that you're unlikely to file a SAR on or unlikely to be risky, but you have to speak to them anyways, that can be noise. Or it could be from an investigator's perspective, some of the steps they have to take, right? A lot of firms will have steps of, hey, you gotta attach this documentation, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And if you look at it at the end of the day, are all of those things going to impact their core decision on whether they file or not? Some of them will, some of them won't. So that's where we want to look at and saying is, can we, automate the detection side of it? And I really think of investigation as detection, and vice versa, right? You think of what is an investigator doing at the core of it? They're detecting whether a crime has happened. Now, whatever that detection system is upstream from them, it's funneling the activity down because you can't have everyone looking at everything within the bank all the time, right? You have to prioritize your resources. So we have detection systems to help funnel down what should be interesting, and then we have users to funnel through the rest of that noise to then make sense of the 3 or 5 or 10% of what's suspicious there. So that's my definition. I'd be curious how you look at that, Tom.
Yeah, so I come out of the world of anti-bribery, anti-corruption compliance, as opposed to your world in financial services. And so our regulator there are two, the Department of Justice, who are prosecutors, not regulators, and then the Securities and Exchange Commission, who can be regulators and also prosecutors. In our world, we are given guidance by the DOJ in a document. The most recent was 2024, called the Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Programs. And it set sort of broad parameters around AI for governance. And that was as far as they went back then. But I wanted to give that introduction to lead into the real question I want to ask you, which is you come from what we call a regulated industry, and you're servicing clients in regulated industries. What's the role of regulators in this? And are you able to have interaction or interplay to make, perhaps not get regulatory blessing, but at least make sure you're on the right track for what the regulators are expecting? Or is it simply just an extension of what you are already doing, just a lot faster and with a lot more efficiency?
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the biggest hurdles particularly for AML, right? Is getting adoption of new things is harder than in a space like fraud, right, where you're not regulated as heavily, right? So from ours, we look at the perspective of always, you need to sort of have that relationship with your regulator. They're never going to bless a solution, right? Our solution has been deployed at hundreds of the world's largest banks and many of the tier ones, but even still, they're never going to give us a seal of that. Which is fine. But yeah, I think any new technology you're adopting is making your regulators comfortable with it. Where I think what's really interesting is some of our customers that are at banks now in these roles is they're former regulators themselves. So they have, very specific plans on how they want to adopt the technology and how they're going to bring their regulator along in that process because they have that experience as a regulator and what would make them comfortable. But yeah, I think getting, regulator buy-in, but also sometimes getting internal buy-in from your model risk teams and otherwise, it's just having everyone having a seat at the table, being transparent with what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think one fear with AI is, hey, AI is going to do my, from an investigator perspective or any other perspective, you're looking and say, hey, AI is going to take my job. That's theirs, right? And that's not the case. But from a regulator perspective, it's like, hey, you're just using AI to cut costs, and that's not it at all. You look at it and you say, hey, AI is actually going to let me look at more risks than I look at today. I was having a conversation with another chief compliance officer recently, and he said to me, he said, look, I may have 10 risks that I know my institution covers, but I only have the resources and tooling to actually cover 7 of those. And my audit will come to me and say, you have to cover all 10 of them. And he'll say, look, if you want to go to the CEO and increase my budget, by twofold, then I can cover all of them. Otherwise we can argue whether I've covered the right 7 of those 10 risks. But something like this where you can automate, some of the most manual parts, you can then expand what you look at and start to actually look at more.
Yeah, that's a great conversation to have. First, as you mentioned, you have 10 risks, but you prioritize those risks. And if it's the top 7 and you're managing those, then you can document that management. And perhaps with the tools that you and your team are able to bring to bear, you could extend that risk management to all 10, at least enough to give a notification if something on those bottom 3 pop up.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
So when you go into a financial institution, are you talking to a CCO, a CTO, a CEO, all of the above, the board of directors? Who are you sitting across the table with to have this conversation?
I think it depends on the institution. Yeah, usually it's going to be something like a CCO or a CAMLO, a Chief Anti-Money Laundering Officer. Some organizations are more tech heavy and so the CTO may be involved in those. But yeah, typically like a CCO or a CAMLO.
How would you say the data analytics and the automation are really transforming the compliance investigations? We've touched on that several times, but how are you able, or you and your team, I don't mean to say you only, because there may be other people at Oracle working on this, but how are you guys changing or transforming those investigations?
Yeah, I think like sort of I said before, right? The automation doesn't take away the judgment. What we're trying to do is just automate a lot of that work. And I used to say, and it's some people now look at me and say that what is ETL, right? But the data process of extracting, transforming, and loading is we used to call investigators doing human ETL, right? Because they'd get a case, they'd open the case and say, okay, who is it? And look for their background and say, all right, this is a retired nurse and she's on a fixed income or whatever the situation is. Then you're trying to figure out, okay, what actually happened? What system do I need to go to? And you're gathering all these data points, bringing them in, and then you're using your judgment to figure out whether this is normal for her or not. So with the automation and with the data analytics, what we're just trying to do is all of that ahead of time, right? So the AI client would look at something before a human looks at it and would say, okay, here's the underlying activity from the risk engine. These are the investigation plans I follow in accordance with that risk, and those investigation plans are determined by the institution who's using it. Then it reaches out to the same systems the investigator would. It understands everything about the entity being reviewed, and it does all of that initial profiling and understanding of whether hey, this activity might be normal for a retired nurse on a fixed income. And then again surfaces that with a recommendation to a user so that they open up and they're really using their judgment. They're not going and doing the data gathering and all the manual pieces. So it really helps bring a lot more consistency to the process and shave a lot of the manual tasks off that really don't use I don't want to say don't use their best skills. I mean, I used to be an investigator when I first started, so I know how hard they work. But going and gathering data from 15 different screens wasn't my favorite part of the job. My favorite part of the job was figuring out, when we found someone bad or detecting something. So that's how we look at it.
Are these tools able to be used in the customer onboarding process at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So we apply them pretty much across the compliance chain. So from customer onboarding, doing screening checks or otherwise, through enhanced due diligence, through AML investigations, across the board. We have different agents to do that.
Frankly, one of my favorite experiences at a bank was when I opened a checking account for my podcast network. And the bank officer was a little bit older woman, and she sat with me, and we had a 30-minute conversation. It was just delightful. And at the end, I thought, that was the best interrogation I've ever sat through. She asked me every AML question she needed in a non-offensive manner, but gave her the information that she needed, to fill out the forms and complete it. Is the information your tools, the Oracle tools can bring, can really help that bank officer who has to make that determination do exactly that?
Yeah, I think typically, right, Oracle's not a data provider. So some of those, like sources of income or some of those other aspects she might be asking about, if you have those data sources available, those can all be analyzed. So the agents can access any data source that you would have. But some of those things only come out in a conversation, right? And sometimes people, even in a conversation or when they fill those out, they're not honest, right? So I go back to the earlier question you asked about, being more proactive with identifying risks and how do we do that? And what I would always say is most of the risk-based systems today are based on trust, right? I came into the bank, I told you I was gonna, do X, Y, and Z with my money, and this was gonna be my income, and you put that down, your risk model said I'm X risk, right? But unless you have monitoring to identify, hey, he said he's a student, and this is the activity, but he's really acting as a third-party importer or whatever he's doing, then, you need to be able to cross that chasm. So I think that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think we can access a lot of the data. Some of the things that she may have pulled out of you may only surface in a conversation, but running the analysis on the data, gathering some of those other data points certainly can be done more efficiently and certainly help speed up the process of it.
What do you see as some of the emerging challenges in risk management for AML and how you are helping organizations really prepare for these down the road?
I think the one biggest challenge is the same challenge I think we've had in the history of AML, which is that it's not, it's just keeping pace with the bad actors, right? We usually find a way to catch them, but someone who's making their living from, some ill-gotten means is always more incentivized to go and find another way around it. So I think that's the sort of biggest challenge is just keeping pace with them. And now we're seeing, AI misuse and deep fakes and those sort of things on the fraud side. Some of these instant payments and other synthetic identities are a little, add some more noise and anonymity to the process. So, and to borrow what you said earlier, you said, we synthesize a lot of data, and that's true, right? As we look at so much data, and I had a conversation with someone at ACAMS who ran a large investigation team. And he's telling me, he's like, look, we have all this really cool data. When a package ships, we know what was in the package. We know how much it weighed. We know how many other people did this. He said, but we don't have the people that can look at all this data and make a decision on it quickly. So I think that's sort of one of the challenges is as we get more of that data is do you have the systems in place, the intelligence to be able to make sense of that data.
Is that something that an AI or other technological solution can help with, or are we still very human reliant at this point?
No, that's absolutely something that AI can help with, right? Is looking at all those different data elements and saying, hey, if you are anticipating this profile, but the package weight doesn't equal that, or there's multiple IPs in use at the same session, or you're sending a package to the you're sending a package effectively to yourself, right? You can pick up those things and you can detect those things with AI very quickly. Now you'll still have a human use judgment on, ultimately the outcome of that. But yeah, that sort of synthesizing understanding of intelligence is something that, machine learning and AI are really good at.
Can I maybe ask you to look down the road? I was going to ask for 5 years, but that may be way too long. Maybe 18 months or 3 years. Where do you see the evolution of what you and your team are doing, and or on my side of the fence, if it's the compliance or AML professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and it is hard. I'm glad you reframed it to like 18 months because 5 years, 5 years is hard to look ahead at. But I think how things might change for professionals in the space is, I think human AI collaboration is going to be a must, right? I mean, most everyone at some point has interacted with ChatGPT now, and that's certainly part of it. But there's so much more to it than that. So I think. Uh, yeah, it's being, more collaborative with AI, trying to understand the output of it. So it's not really just sort of just getting comfortable with the AI and getting comfortable using it. It's being able to communicate with it, if that makes sense. And if you look at like what a skill might translate to that is, um, if you've ever done the Myers-Briggs analysis or those where they tell you what personality type you are and how you like to be communicated and those sort of things, I almost think AI is going to be like a different personality type. And if you've ever interacted with it, you need to know certain ways how to coax to get what you want of it. And so either asking what you need from it or understanding what it's telling you and maybe where you need to probe deeper or where you need to change it. I think that's going to be sort of one of the emerging areas that's going to change and one of the skills people are going to need to develop.
One of the things I'm privileged to do is teach at law school on compliance. So I wanted to maybe ask what you see is necessary or needed in the next generation of compliance or AML officers for banks or other financial institutions.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think definitely that AI fluency applies to that, as well as just whatever systems you have in place is building agile systems and teams, right? 3 years ago, ChatGPT came around, right? No one knew that was really going to hit the scene. I think some people thought it might evolve there, but that sort of hit the world by storm. So if you have, really sort of what's the word I want to use? Maybe like legacy systems or legacy teams that can't pivot quickly, you're not going to be able to react and adopt. And then being able to lead really across disciplines. When I came into AML, I always refer to it as like the Wild West, because I was able to do everything, and it was really cool because I was doing investigations, but then I also got to build scenarios and models because we didn't have data scientists then, right? So my boss would just give me a bunch of work like that, like, hey, he'd come back and say, hey, my boss went to a conference and is really disturbed about what he's hearing about human trafficking. Can we build something? And so, yeah, I go dig around and, figure stuff out and build it. So I got to do a lot of those different things. But I think being able to lead across disciplines of, not just the compliance piece, but also data, tech, AI, and being comfortable with all those, I think that's going to be one of the keys for sort of the next generation of compliance leaders.
And finally, where do you see corporate culture as, or what role does culture have in the implementation of many of the solutions we've talked about today?
Boy, we could spend 20 minutes just on that, Tom, but I think, yeah, that's always the challenge, right? Because corporate culture and different views on this. I heard I won't name the customer, but I was talking to someone this morning, and they were saying they don't believe in AI. Um, and they don't believe AI is going to change things, right? So if you have that sort of culture, if you have it, it is going to be difficult to adopt change, right? But I just think generally speaking, most organizations we speak to, or most ones that I speak with, is they are very interested in doing better. They all care very passionately and deeply about finding financial crime and stopping it and doing the right thing. So I think it's getting that buy-in across and making sure that everyone's driving towards that goal, and sometimes putting aside the territorial or political aspects of large corporation, which I'm sure you can appreciate given your past. But I think that's sort of the way I look at it.
Well, Jason, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listener wanted to connect with you or find out anything more about the Oracle products or even the topics we've touched upon today, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
Yeah, either LinkedIn for myself or Oracle Financial Services on LinkedIn, or certainly our website, which we can provide you the details for to link to.
Well, Jason, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, ditto, Tom. It was great catching up.